In 2008, California made a promise. A massive one. $33 billion, a bullet train. Los Angeles to San Francisco in under 3 hours. Voters bought into it. They funded it. They waited. Then they waited some more. Now it's 2026, and there's no train, there's no track, there's no finish line in sight. Just billions of dollars that vanished into thin air. A system designed to answer to absolutely no one, and a story that every single American taxpayer deserves to hear. They promised a $33 billion train. It's 2026, there's still zero track, and what went down in between is way more disturbing than most people realize. This isn't just California's problem. This is your hard-earned money. This is your government. And this is exactly the kind of story we cover on this channel. No spin, no agenda, just the facts that powerful institutions are hoping you never connect. If you think Americans deserve real answers about where their tax dollars are going, hit that subscribe button to Story Shock right now and smash that notification bell. We're on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, people who are completely done being kept in the dark. Don't let this be the last video you see from us. Topic 1. The promise that sold a dream. It was 2008, and California was gearing up to make history. The state put a bold proposition on the ballot, Proposition 1A, promising voters a high-speed train connecting LA and San Francisco in under 3 hours, for a grand total of just $33 billion, fully up and running by 2020. It sounded almost too good to be true. Cleaner travel, less bumper-to-bumper traffic, thousands of jobs, and state-of-the-art infrastructure that would put California ahead of the curve globally. Voters signed off on it. 53% of them said yes. And just like that, the dream was greenlit. What made that promise hit so hard wasn't just the price tag. It was the specificity. Politicians didn't just say, someday, or, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. They gave a hard number. They gave a strict deadline. They painted a picture so concrete that even the skeptics had a tough time arguing against it. Think about it. $33 billion for a train that would rival Japan's Shinkansen, right here on American soil. For a state that was already leading the pack in tech and innovation, it felt like a no-brainer. The kind of project that gets written into history books. But here's the thing about promises built on wishful thinking, rather than actual engineering reality. They tend to age like milk. The price tag wasn't set by boots-on-the-ground independent engineers. It was cooked up through projections designed to win votes. The deadline wasn't based on real construction timelines. It was based on what people wanted to hear. And the vision, it was real. The execution plan behind it? Well, that's where things get uncomfortable. Because what happened next wasn't just a bump in the road. It was a massive wake-up call about how public money actually moves in America. Topic 2. 18 years later. 18 billion spent, zero track laid. Let that sink in for a second. 18 years. Over $18 billion in public funds down the drain. And if you drove through California's Central Valley today looking for a high-speed rail line, you wouldn't find a single thing. No trains running, no passengers boarding, no tickets being sold. What you'd find instead are scattered construction zones, unfinished concrete structures standing in the middle of nowhere, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. For a project that was supposed to be a done deal by 2020, that's not just a delay. That's a total collapse. To put $18 billion into perspective, that's roughly the entire annual budget for the state of Nevada. It's enough cash to build over 60 major hospitals. It's enough to fix thousands of miles of crumbling roads across the country. And yet, when you ask what California got in return for that massive investment, the honest answer is concrete pillars out in the desert. Not a single mile of track has been laid on the actual route. The construction that does exist is trapped in a 171-mile stretch in the Central Valley, a segment that connects no major cities, serves no real population hubs, and gets the average Californian absolutely nowhere. What makes this even harder to swallow is that this isn't a story of bad luck or unforeseen curveballs. Engineers flagged these issues early on, auditors threw up red flags, independent reviewers sent out warnings that were completely ignored or swept under the rug. The money kept flowing, the goalposts kept moving, and the explanations just kept getting more creative. 18 years of creative excuses, and still no track. If a private company pulled a stunt like this, they would have been shut down and investigated a decade ago. But this isn't a private company, and that difference matters more than most people realize. Topic 3. The cost that never stops growing. Here's a number that should make every American taxpayer do a double take. $231 billion. That's the high-end projection for what the California high-speed rail could ultimately cost. A figure so astronomically high, it's almost abstract. But let's bring it down to earth. The original promise to voters back in 2008 was $33 billion. That number has since ballooned to an official estimate of $126 billion for just Phase 1, and independent projections push it all the way to $231 billion. That's not a cost overrun. That's a completely different project that nobody ever voted for. To understand how a number jumps from $33 billion to $231 billion, you have to look at how these estimates are built in the first place. They aren't conservative. They aren't built on worst-case scenarios with safety nets baked in. They're tailor-made to win approval, optimistic by design, vague wherever specificity would set off alarm bells, and structured so that by the time the real costs come to light, the contracts are already signed and the money is already out the door. It's a pattern so well documented in infrastructure megaprojects around the world that researchers actually gave it a name: optimism bias. California didn't invent it, but California might have perfected it. What's truly staggering is that this price hike didn't happen overnight. It crept up slowly, revision after revision, business plan after business plan, each one quietly tweaking the numbers upward, while the headlines shifted to something else. $1 billion here, $10 billion there. Until one day, the peer review chair, the guy who had overseen this project for over a decade, sat down and wrote a letter to the state legislature saying the project had hit, in his own words, a dead end. 700% over the original estimate, and the meter is still running. Topic 4. The bait and switch. There's a moment in this story that cuts right through all the bureaucratic jargon, all the revised business plans, and all the carefully worded official statements. It came from Congressman Vince Fong, a California Republican sitting on the House Transportation Committee, someone who has watched this train wreck unfold up close for years. His words were simple and straight to the point. We're now in 2026. There are no trains. There's no track laid. It was a complete bait and switch. Not a setback, not a delay, a bait and switch. Those words carry a very specific weight, and he chose them deliberately. What makes that statement land even harder is who else started singing the same tune. California's own Transportation Secretary, Tax Payer, sat down with CBS and said something state officials almost never say out loud. There were mistakes made. Some of the criticisms on this project, I think, are very fair. When the person responsible for defending the project starts validating its biggest critics, that's not damage control. That's a confession. And then there's Lou Thompson, the former chair of the independent peer review group, the man appointed specifically to provide neutral oversight. After more than a decade of formal evaluations, he wrote directly to the state legislature in March 2026, calling the project a dead end. Not a political opponent, not an outside critic. The project's very own watchdog. What the bait and switch actually looks like in real life is this. Voters signed off on a $33 billion train between two of America's biggest cities, with a clear deadline and a clear route. What they're getting instead, if they get anything at all, is a partial corridor through the Central Valley, connecting towns most Californians couldn't find on a map, at a cost that has multiplied beyond recognition. The vision that won the votes is long gone. It was quietly replaced, one revision at a time, while billions of dollars continued to flow, and the people who greenlit those billions, still in office, still collecting paychecks, still talking about the future of California infrastructure. Topic 5. The federal bailout that got pulled. By July 2025, Washington had seen enough. The Federal Railroad Administration, the federal body in charge of overseeing rail projects across the country, made a move that sent a clear signal to Sacramento. The well had run dry. Roughly $4 billion in federal grants were pulled after a formal compliance review concluded that the California High-Speed Rail Authority had dropped the ball in 9 distinct areas. 9. Not one little oversight, not one missed deadline. 9 separate failures documented and reviewed. Among them, a $7 billion funding shortfall just for the initial operating segment, and a missed 2024 deadline to even select a train vendor. In other words, after nearly 2 decades, California hadn't even picked out the trains yet. What makes this moment such a big deal is what it represents beyond the money itself. Federal funding for infrastructure isn't just handed out like candy. It comes with agreements, strict timelines, and compliance rules that exist precisely to protect taxpayer dollars from being swallowed up by projects with zero realistic path to completion. When the FRA pulled that $4 billion, it wasn't a political hit job. It was a verdict. The conclusion that after years of warnings, extensions, revised plans, and broken promises, the California High-Speed Rail Authority had failed to show it could deliver on the most basic terms of the deal. The federal government, in essence, stopped buying the story. The authority fought back, filing a lawsuit to claw back the funding, and arguing the decision was politically motivated. But even their own defense struggled to answer the most fundamental question. How exactly do you finish this project without federal backing, with a $7 billion gap in the first segment alone, and with private investment that basically only exists on paper? California eventually dropped the lawsuit, and with that, the single largest source of outside funding for the project vanished, quietly, without a press conference, without any accountability, and without a plan for what comes next. Just another chapter in a story that keeps ending the exact same way. Topic 6. What could $18 billion have built instead? Let's play a different kind of game. Not a hypothetical one, but a reality check. $18 billion is the amount California has already burned through on a train that doesn't run, on tracks that don't exist, connecting cities that were never part of the original deal. So, what does $18 billion actually look like when it's spent on stuff that actually works? According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, it would be enough to replace every single structurally deficient bridge in the state of California. All of them. Every single one. Or it could fund the construction of roughly 60 full-scale hospitals at a time when healthcare costs are the #1 financial anxiety for American families in 2026. Consider what's happening in the real world while this money disappeared into planning documents and consultant fees. 1 in 3 Americans skipped a doctor's appointment last year because they couldn't afford it. 40% of U.S. cities are slashing public budgets because of inflation and shrinking tax revenues. Roads in the Central Valley, the very region where this rail project is supposedly being built, are ranked among the worst maintained in the entire country. The people living closest to the construction sites, the ones who were promised jobs and an economic boom, are still waiting. The cranes moved in. The promises followed. The results never showed up. There's a concept in economics called opportunity cost. The idea that every dollar spent on one thing is a dollar you can't spend on something else. It sounds academic until you put a face on it. Every billion that flowed into this project was a billion that didn't go into community health clinics, didn't go into upgrading schools, didn't go into the kind of unglamorous, unsexy public works that actually change people's daily lives. The train was supposed to be the future. But for the communities that needed that investment the most, the future kept getting pushed back. One revised business plan at a time. Topic 7. Who's actually accountable? Here's the question that never gets a straight answer. Who is actually taking the fall for this? $18 billion spent, 0 track laid, cost estimates multiplied by 7, federal funding pulled for 9 documented failures. And yet, if you scan the headlines looking for arrests, resignations, or criminal investigations, you'll find absolutely nothing. What you will find is a 2023 state audit with a title so brutal, it reads like a criminal indictment. California High-Speed Rail Authority. Its flawed decision-making and poor contract management have contributed to billions in cost overruns and delays in the system's construction. The auditor didn't mince words. She put the blame right in the title. And still, crickets. What the audit uncovered goes way beyond just bad management. The California State Auditor found employees, contractors, and consultants operating with massive conflicts of interest, people making decisions on contracts while having financial ties to the very companies raking in those contracts. In 2019, thousands of pages of public records were quietly wiped from the authority's website, making it nearly impossible for journalists and researchers to track how money was being spent without jumping through endless public records request hoops. When an institution starts making its own paper trail vanish, that's not an administrative glitch. That's a deliberate choice. And choices like that don't happen by accident. The deeper problem here isn't just California. It's the entire system that allows this to happen anywhere in America, where mega projects get approved by voters, executed by authorities insulated from real-world consequences, audited by bodies whose recommendations have zero teeth, and funded by money that keeps flowing no matter how bad the performance is. The people who cooked up the original promise have moved on. The consultants who billed millions are already working on the next gig. The contractors who missed deadlines are still holding the contracts. And the American taxpayer, the same one stressing over rent, medical bills, and retirement savings, is left holding an $18 billion receipt for a train that only exists on paper. That's not incompetence. That's a system working exactly how it was designed to work. Conclusion. So here's where we land. A promise made back in 2008. A 2020 deadline that came and went. $18 billion swallowed up. Zero track laid. A cost that exploded from $33 billion to over $126 billion and counting. Federal funding pulled for 9 documented failures. An audit that spelled out the disaster right in its own title, and not a single person held accountable. This isn't a story about a train. It's a story about what happens when public money meets zero consequences, and who left holding the bag in the end. You are. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. If a private company burned through $18 billion, delivered absolutely nothing, and quietly erased its own records from public view, how long before it was shut down and slapped with a federal investigation? A year. 2. So why does this keep happening with your tax dollars? Why do the exact same institutions that fail keep getting handed blank checks? And more importantly, what are you going to do with that answer? The info is out there. The audits exist, the letters exist, the confessions exist. What's missing is the pressure that only happens when enough people start paying attention. So share this video with someone who needs a wake-up call. Leave a comment below. Do you think this project should be canceled completely, or is there still a case for crossing the finish line? We read every single response, and if you haven't subscribed to Story Shock yet, now is the perfect time. We're building a community of Americans who ask the hard questions and demand real answers. And we're closing in on 1,000 subscribers. Hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and make sure you don't miss what's dropping next, because the California train is just the tip of the iceberg.